Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Mark Barnico. I'm the Executive Director of the University of Chicago campus here in Hong Kong, and I want to welcome you to tonight's program. We have a really good lineup tonight, but I first wanted to just thank all of our faculty who are here from Chicago, including our speaker and our moderator, who I'll introduce in a bit, but also Bernd Wittenbrink, he's our faculty in residence here. He's been here for several months. Bernd, thanks for coming tonight. And also Kimberly Huang, Professor Kimberly Huang, back in the back with all of our young fellow students. We have 11 students from UChicago, from the college here this summer, doing research projects together with Hong Kong University students in combination. So excited to have everyone here tonight. We want to welcome you to this talk, Why the US is Frightening the World and What This Means for China. And we're sharing this event, as always, live on YouTube and Facebook and Zoom. And as you all know, if you have a question during the program and you're on Zoom, go ahead and put it in the questions and answer part of Zoom, tab on Zoom. Let me first introduce Professor Robert Pape, who's with us in person tonight. I'm so excited that Professor Pape is here. Many of you probably know him from our computer screens or our phone screens because he's been a great partner for this campus over the last year, really, collaborating with us very closely. And he's finally here in Hong Kong in person. We collaborated together on the US presidential election series for 2024 with Professor Pape. And as busy as he is, he called me, I think it was on a Sunday morning, my time, Sunday evening, his time, and said, Mark, I need to do some field research. Let's put a trip to China together. And so Professor Pape has been touring China the last 10 days or so, I believe. And we agreed that if he was going to go do all that research, we would hope that he would come to Hong Kong and actually talk about his field research in China, and he agreed to do that. So he'll interpret some of his findings from his recent trip in China, which I'm really excited to hear about, and I'm so delighted that you're here. Professor Pape is a professor of political science and founding director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats at the University of Chicago, specializing in international security affairs and American political violence. He's extremely prolific in his writing. I don't know that I have all of them here, but his publications include Cutting the Fuse, The Explosion of Suicide Terrorism and How to Stop It, Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, Bombing to Win, Air Power and Coercion in War, Why Economic Sanctions Do Not Work, The Determinants of International Moral Action, and The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, as well as Soft Balancing Against the United States, which I think we'll be talking about tonight. Professor Pape's more recent research in 2024 includes Our Own Worst Enemies, The Violence, Style, in American Politics, Understanding Campus Fears After October 7th and How to Reduce Them, The Political Geography of the January 6th Insurrectionists, Hamas is Winning, Why Israel's Failing Strategy Makes the Enemy Stronger, and Understanding the Impact of Military Service on Support for Political Violence. Professor Pape's commentary is also very prolific. He's been invited by so many New York, Washington, and international media. There's too many to name, but the New York Times, Washington Post, New Republic, Boston Globe, Los Angeles Times, as well as Face the Nation in the United States, The Whole Story with Anderson Cooper, CNN. He has been everywhere with his research and sharing it with the general public. One thing I did when I introduced this program on the last 2 weeks was to mention that you've been an advisor to every administration since 9/11. And so he has direct contact and access with the folks in Washington who are making a lot of the policy and decisions. Before coming to Chicago in 1999, he taught international relations at Dartmouth College and air power strategy for the USAF School of Advanced Air Power Studies. He reminded me again tonight, as he has when we've talked before, that he first visited China as a graduate student in 1979. So he is not a stranger to China. Professor Pape received his PhD from the University of Chicago in 1988 when I graduated with my MBA, and graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Pittsburgh in 1982. I want to just give him a round of applause. Thank him for coming tonight and welcome him to the stage.
That was terrific. Thank you very much. Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Mark, for that great introduction. Ken, thank you very much. Thanks to the Hong Kong Center. One of the reasons I became a professor is because I just love learning things. And what's happened with the Hong Kong Center is, as you just heard from Mark, I wanted to learn some things about China, and I needed to have an excuse. And they said, sure, we'll do that. And they provided that, and I hope we're going to have 10 minutes at the end of the main talk so I can share with you a little bit about what I've learned in the last 10 days in China. But without further ado, I want to talk to you about probably what is the main question on everyone's mind. It's certainly been on where I've spoken in China in the last 10 days. Can China rise peacefully even with the new administration? And my answer, not coming from cultural norms, not coming from economic interdependence. I'm a card-carrying realist who believes in survival and power. My answer is yes. Even with America unilaterally dismantling the liberal international order, so long as China maintains moderate policies, the answer is yes. And I want to explain my reasons for that today. Now, we're going to talk about the new administration. And as you know, the Trump administration has come out with an enormous number of executive orders, over 160 by last count. And these include major changes in international affairs, also major changes in domestic affairs. Well, you're going to hear tonight these two elements, domestic and international, are tightly intertwined. Not the normal approach that we have in all my years of studying international politics. That said, I will talk in the beginning mostly about the international issues. Now, the big questions we're going to tackle tonight are what characterizes the new administration's foreign policy? I'm going to show you a lot of details, but I want to give you the big picture about what's going on. And then I want to tell you why that is happening, which I think will help clarify a lot of the questions you have. Then I'll tell you about how countries are responding. Then I'm going to talk to you about the long-term consequences, both for the international system in the world and also for China. Now, to start, you're going to hear tonight a lot about how the Trump administration is dismantling the liberal international order. So we've got to first define it, because I'm sorry to say that no president in my lifetime has done a good job of defining it. And I complain about this to some of the White Houses, but they give me reasons why they can't do this. But what do I mean by the liberal international order? What is this thing? Well, this is the order that the United States led, created. Dean Acheson wrote a book. He was Secretary of State in the late 40s, early 50s, called Present at the Creation. This is what I mean by the liberal international order. This is the order created after World War II, been in existence for 70-some years, 75 years, and its purpose wasn't just to get wealthy, wasn't just to be Mr. Nice Guy as America. The purpose was to prevent World War III. That was the key goal. Now, there were some key rules they believed that had to be in place to do that. What are those rules of the rules-based order? Well, let me just tell you what they are. You could also read Dean Acheson's book. Rule number one, do not start a war. That means do not, as a country A, take your army, cross a border with country B, and take and conquer that country or a piece of it, and punish states who do that. That's really rule number one. Rule number two is trade rather than annex territory. Very important. Rule number three, promote other democracies. So yes, America's done that. And yes, we have not been very good with human rights as we have tried to do that. So there's a whole issue here we can talk about in Q&A. Very well aware. I'm not saying we've promoted human rights. I'm saying we're trying to stop World War III. Now, what are the key institutions? The UN, built after with the New World Order, GATT, the WTO, and also NATO. And the purpose of NATO was to keep American troops in Europe, to keep Russian troops out of Europe and German troops down. Why? To prevent war. That's what I'm talking about the liberal order. Now, Trump's first term, 2007, Trump 1.0, the startling thing I'm going to tell you is in his first term, he basically promoted the liberal order. Now, did he complain about allies that weren't spending enough? He sure did. He had policy disagreements. But if you look at what's on this slide, you'll see he is the president who gave weapons to Ukraine. Those anti-tank javelins that stopped the Russian onslaught in February 2002, that came from Donald Trump. This did not come from Barack Obama. He's the one who gave those weapons. Yes, he put some modest tariffs on China. These were modest, they were real, but they're modest. What about the Middle East? Basically ignored the whole issue with Hamas and Gaza, economic pressure on Iran, no military. And then what about the Western Hemisphere? Yep, he wanted the wall to stop the immigrants, but no military threats or any other threats to others in the Western Hemisphere. Most people thought when Trump was reelected that he was going to have a similar foreign policy. That's not what happened. What happened is across the board, Trump 2.0 is fundamentally different. Look at the radical change in the Western Hemisphere. We're talking about American expansion for the first time since the 19th century. Let's look in Europe. You're going to see that America is politically threatening the governments in Western Europe, supporting Russia. What about Asia? This is now ratcheting up not just tariffs for some money, threatening China's political stability. What about the rest of our partners, or rest of the world? You're going to see, of course, tariffs across the board. And what about in the Middle East? This is all about promoting Israel's expansion and dominance in the Middle East. This is very different than what most people thought. Now, what is the administration doing? In a nutshell, America is unilaterally dismantling the liberal international order. And America was the country that built it. So this is a very big change to the liberal international order, nowhere near easily reversed, even if Donald Trump were to disappear tomorrow. Much has already happened. Now, what does America's post-liberal order look like? We already see the rules of the new system. Rule number one is war is now acceptable. That's a big change. President Trump has said he understands Russia's invasion and conquest of Ukraine. He's not just understanding Israel's bombing of Iran, he's supporting it with our bombing, America's bombing of Iran. This is a very different set of rules. You're going to see he's supporting annexing territory for resources, not trade. He is undermining those liberal democracies in Western Europe. This is a very different set of rules, and of course, undermining those key institutions, which may exist on paper, but they're becoming very hollow. Just literally in the last, 18 hours, Donald Trump has said, well, there's many different definitions of Article 5 in NATO. What that means is all bets are off, folks. You think if you're in Western Europe, are you really counting on Donald Trump to come in and bail you out? I don't think so. Now, what do I mean by new rules in Europe? We're undermining liberal democracies in Europe. If you haven't read Vice President Vance's speech on February 14th, you should go read this speech. He said in a room just like this, which was full of the heads of state of those Western governments. So imagine you're the prime ministers and foreign ministers. He said to their faces, the threat I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any external actor. I worry about the threat from within. He told them to their face, you're the threat. Think about that for a moment. What happened 2 weeks later? 2 weeks later, and this I'm sure you saw, was that Oval Office, let's call it discussion, with Zelensky, where President Trump tells him directly here, you're not worth defending unless you give us resources. You're not worth defending. And what are those resources? He wanted half of Ukraine's mineral wealth, 50%. We're going to see what he got. He does. Ultimately, Zelensky makes that deal. You'll see what he got for it in just a moment. Then what happens? Then what happens is he gets on the phone with America's old arch enemy, Russia, who's attacking Ukraine, and basically starts to immediately concede the very big diplomatic demands of Russia. There's no negotiation here, just offered up on a silver platter. But also, very importantly, which you may have missed, what did J.D. Vance do? He walked out of that session where he basically called for regime change in Western Europe, and he met with the leader of the AfD in Germany. Now, in case you don't know, you should look this up. They are the most pro-Nazi party in Europe. They want to take down the Holocaust memorials that have been put up. They are anti-immigrant, and what he wants, J.D. Vance wanted when he's meeting, is he's putting pressure on the Germans to allow them to be part of the ruling coalition. This is not just some sort of soft support. This is direct intrusion in German politics like we have not seen before, and this is what the Europeans are responding to. Now, what happened just a few months later? So Zelensky gives up 50% of his mineral rights. And what does he get? Vladimir Putin is about to respond to the Ukrainian attack. And on the phone, what does Donald Trump do? Does he stand up for that NATO ally now that, or not NATO ally, but that ally? Now he's got his the mineral rights? Not at all. He basically says, yeah, sometimes you just got to let them fight. Boys will be boys. Well, just imagine what everybody else is seeing when they see that. They got nothing for that mineral deal. So what's happening in the response? These are the public opinion polls. And you're going to hear a little bit more about this because I'm going to talk about soft balancing in a minute. But what's happening in Europe as this is occurring? The European publics are figuring this out right away, folks. Just like everybody else is, they're seeing America is the new threat to Europe. And by the way, America's now elected Donald Trump twice. So Americans, when I give this talk there, I tell them, you can't get out of this by thinking that you didn't vote for Trump. No, we are all part of this now. And look at those numbers in the red, dramatic shift. What are the Germans? What are people thinking about this? The new German prime minister, he just wins a couple of weeks after Vance spoke. And what does he say his number one goal is when he wins? It is not even Ukraine or Russia. His number one goal is to achieve independence from the United States. That's what he sees as the big problem. And starts talking about nuclear weapons. Not that he's going to build them right away, but we haven't seen Germans talk about nuclear weapons in these 75 years. This is a big change, at least since the early 1950s. What about Starmer? Britain. Now, Britain is supposed to be the most pro-American ally. And what are they doing? They are fast building military forces. And why are they doing that? They're seeing that they are alone. America's not coming to bail them out. And what's just been happening in the last couple of days, they're doing everything possible to stroke Donald Trump's ego in order to slow down the withdrawal of troops from Europe. That's what's going on here. I don't think they're really counting on America bailing them out. They would just like to keep the troops there a little bit longer. What is China doing while this is happening? They're being very shrewd. The foreign minister of China spoke immediately after J.D. Vance, literally the very next speaker in Munich. And what did he say? Well, Vance is effectively calling for regime change in Western Europe. He's saying China sees a multipolar world where Europe is an important pole, that the two sides are partners, not rivals. That is, he's being the good cop. He's saying, come to China, picking up the mess from what J.D. Vance left off. Now, what's happening in North America, the Western Hemisphere here? First thing is focus on Canada. I'm sure you've all heard Trump wants to make Canada the 51st state. He wants to change the border. But here's the border, that 1908 border. Just put your eye on that border for a second, because I'm going to tell you something you probably don't know. And that is, this is where Canada's oil is. You see, yeah, now you get why Trump might want to change that border, including in the Great Lakes, which is some red. So if you want resources here, what you're doing is you're putting pressure on Canada, and that's the oil on the other side. I'm pretty sure this is what the Canadian national security advisors are focused on when they hear they just want to change that border. And Canada's oil is third in the world. If you just look at that, that's the red on the other side. Also, what has Trump said about Greenland, Panama? We will take them one way or another. Refuses to rule out military force. And in fact, in March, the end of March, for the first time ever, he's ordered the military to draw up plans to conquer Greenland. That doesn't mean we're conquering it, but we didn't have plans on the shelf to conquer Greenland. We've got them. We're starting to have them now. How's Canada responding? Canada is seeing right through this. They are seeing, as Trudeau is explaining, that yes, Trump's hitting us with tariffs, but what he wants is the collapse of the Canadian economy to take some of those resources. That's what he's telling. And what happens? The Canadian population is clearly seeing America as a threat. The Liberal Party, which was actually about to lose the election before Trump started doing all this, you see a rally around the flag effect, just as any realist would predict. That's why Trump's not behaving as a realist, because a realist would clearly tell him this is all going to backfire here. This is not realism by Trump. It's not geopolitics. I'll explain what's going on in just a moment. And then what are the Canadians thinking about? Joining with the EU, joining with the EU. And you'll see these are the seeds of soft balancing that's coming. Now, what's happening in the Middle East? Here, what Trump is doing, he's not just moving an embassy in Jerusalem. He's helping Israel physically expand and dominate the Middle East. That's the big message now that's coming across. So Netanyahu comes to Washington. Trump surprises him with telling him just publicly, apparently there's not even any discussion of this ahead of time, that he wants Israel to basically cleanse all 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza here. This is the dream that Netanyahu's had for decades. And what happens just 6 weeks later here? They're starting to do it. They're starting to do it. Now, they've moved people around, haven't expelled them out into the Sinai yet, but Trump is encouraging all this to happen. He's certainly not stopping it. Okay, and now he militarily threatens Iran. You know that Israel started to strike Iran on June 12th. We, a week later, come in and follow on with that. And those of you following me on X know that I've been tweeting about this almost 5 times a day, all kinds of information. Maybe in Q&A we can talk about this. This is nothing like the liberal international order, folks. Of course, tariffs, big deal here, especially in Asia. You all know this, but these are tariffs as essentially economic sanctions. These are not tariffs. These are tariffs to achieve political goals. What are we talking about? These are the numbers. You're aware of the numbers, 145. These are the new numbers, came down to 30 for 90 days. That's, of course, gonna change over time. The big thing I want to show you, though, is the historic change. This is a graph that's really worth focusing on. You see at the far end, 2017, where they have this gap. One is 5%, the other is 1%. The 5% is the size of the tariff on goods that are tariffed. The 1% are the amount of tariffs on all the goods being imported into the United States overall. What Trump has done is shifted it from the 1% to 10% as a minimum. That goes back to 1947. That's the historic shift we're talking about. That goes back to this is why China's not even bothering going to the WTO. This is not about a WTO dispute. This is a much bigger deal, and that's what's occurring as we speak. Now, how are those tariffs really hitting people? Just the 10% ones. I'm not even going beyond that. Well, Yes, China's on the list, but I think, folks, China's so used to being enemy number one for the United States, they don't know what to do when they're not enemy number one. They're so used to being enemy number one. They're on the list, but they're way down on the list, folks. So they're down there, 4 or 5. They're not down to 0. But China's just one of the countries on the list that are being impacted here. And you can see most of these are our allies: South Korea, the EU, Mexico, Canada, and they have big dependence on their trade. This is and their economies are not doing that great after COVID anyway. So this is really quite a danger to those states. And what's happening to China? They are going after China. This is not a modest set of, and this is really, given China's decline, China's economic decline, the housing problems and so forth, you probably know better than I do here. This is really putting a lot of political pressure on China. I think China will probably weather this, but it is much worse than we've seen before. How is President Xi responding? Calmly, and with moderation. Now, he's not surrendering, okay, that isn't it, but he's also not one-upping the United States. Very, very important. This is a shrewd game of how to deal with a bully, and they're showing some shrewd responses here. This is the way realists would respond here. This is the Bismarcks of the world. Very, very shrewd in how they're responding. Bottom line is, America is economically or militarily threatening most countries in the world. That's a really big shift. Why is this happening? Mass domestic politics is playing a key role. This is not geopolitics. This is not realism 101. This is mass domestic politics like we haven't seen before. Trump 2.0 foreign policy is a reflection of Trump MAGA politics. Once you understand that, you'll see the consistency in what Trump is doing that others right now, that's what they're constantly debating. No one's bringing this up. I think no one else really has brought this up. Once you do, you'll get a lot of coherence as to what's occurring. So Scott Bessent, if you want evidence for what I'm saying, because I'm just going to do some assertions here, go to Scott Bessent's 2-hour interview on Tucker Carlson's podcast in March. This is the best explanation of Trump 2.0 foreign policy in general. And what it's all about is blue-collar workers, helping the MAGA base. Yes, there'll be some adjustment costs, but you'll see 2 hours he's going to explain what I'm talking about. This is the #1 chart that is probably, once you understand this chart, clarifies everything about Trump's politics and also what's occurring. What you see here is from 1980 to 1990, both college-educated workers and non-college-educated workers, the slope is up. But then from 1990 on, the college keeps going up, and what goes down? The non-college. And who goes down the most? White non-college workers. This is the Trump MAGA base, most of it. And also notice, people couldn't figure out, why would Blacks, Hispanics get on board with this? That curve explains a lot of domestic politics in the United States. It also explains what's happening with Trump's foreign policy. That curve, that one chart, is the chart everybody should look at. Now, let's just look at who the voting for November 2024. Notice Trump wins the under 100,000 vote. And that's really striking. That's supposed to be the Democratic Party, folks. That's not the Democratic Party vote anymore. The Democratic Party vote are the people who make more than $100,000 or more. To put it not very kindly, the Democratic Party's become a party of limousine liberals. This is not working out. And why not? Because that's only 40% of America who makes over $100,000. All 40% could vote 100% for Democrats, Kamala Harris, and you lose in a landslide. Well, look at what happened. This helps to explain the politics and the domestic politics is driving the foreign politics. Now, as Trump is doing all this instability in the world, the stock market's coming down, all kinds of chaos is happening here. Notice that his base, sticky up. Sticky up. That 47% was higher than he ever enjoyed in his first term as president. Why? He's feeding the base what it wants. The blue collar workers love he's destroying the white collar workers. They love he's firing all the Democrats from Washington, D.C. They love that he's going after the liberal universities. I love our liberal universities, don't get me wrong, but that's not what's happening in American politics here. And they're going to love that he's going after the sanctuary cities with immigration. So overall, what are the benefits that are happening with the Trump administration's foreign policy? They are ideological. He is wrecking the benefits for the winners for the last 30 years. And even if he doesn't give any material benefit to those losers, the fact that he's wrecking the winners are psychic, emotional benefits that are mattering. That's why this is occurring. What are the consequences? Number one, have to get ready for America as the target of counterbalancing. This started to happen a wee little bit 20 years ago. That's that soft balancing paper in international security, which I'm sorry to say make a major comeback. Now, the key thing you need to know is what has been the benefits for America with the liberal international order. Well, here's the reality. That as a realist, I focus on realities. America's been the strongest country in the world for 125 years, but we haven't faced that much counterbalancing. And look at the numbers. 2010, we were 24% of the world's GDP. Then 1990, 23%. Then we actually go up to 26% today. Our Western European allies since 1990 have gone down 40% or more country by country. Japan down over half. If this is what it means to be Uncle Sucker, I'll take that any day of the week. We're making out like bandits here in the liberal international order. This is what's undergirding American primacy. The benefit of the liberal international order is not that we're softies and not norms-based. The benefit of the liberal international order is that's how America has been number one. And that is what's going to be at risk as we go forward. The new reality is America is the growing threat to Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, the Middle East. We're going from being the protector to the predator. That is what the world is seeing now. Other states now have an active interest in counterbalancing to reduce America's power. How could this happen? 20 years ago, I invented a concept. Did not exist before. I called it soft balancing. We need to understand how balancing against America could even happen. It's not going to start out with hard balancing right away. You're not going to see Chinese nuclear weapons in Tehran, I think, anytime soon. This is not how this is going to work, folks. We're drifting from once people see and the elites see that America is a threat to their state, they're going to have the soft balancing. These are the economic counterbalancing, the institutional counterbalancing that I think is going to grow over time. And in fact, soft balancing has already begun. So as some of you are going to know, after Liberation Day on April 2nd, what happened a week later? China, Japan, South Korea jointly respond to this, and especially China and Japan slow down the purchases of those bonds. Why does that matter? Well, Trump is fine if the stock market goes down 20% because his base has almost no money in the stock market. This is not his base, people know that. But if you have a true depression, that affects the base. You see, that's the red line here. This is not Donald Trump's ego. This is not Donald Trump as willy-nilly unstable. This is Donald Trump as focused on the base, because that's the future of his power and whatever successor he will control. It's the base that matters. Second big consequence, greater risk of preventive war. Literally a year ago, this time, I had to choose what graduate classes I would teach at the University of Chicago this year. And what did I think? I thought, well, I study a lot of American political violence. I thought there was a good chance Trump was going to win grossly. And this is before the debate and the swap out. And so I said to myself, well, good chance he'll win, good chance he'll wreck the liberal international order as is happening. Good chance we're going to have preventive wars. So what was my graduate class just this spring? The theory and practice of preventive war. I taught that for the first time. No other university has ever taught that class than I can find. This isn't on Harvard, MIT. So again, I take a lot of pride that, I'm a big alum from the University of Chicago. I want us to be the leader here, even when things aren't going so well. And what are we seeing with the effects of this new post-liberal order? It is prone to violence. This is not just a permissive condition, the way you're taught in IR theory. This is a very different kind of international order. I actually teach at the University of Chicago Thomas Hobbes. I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't just quote one line. I've been teaching it. Hobbes is talking about a very nasty order in his anarchy. This isn't just a permissive condition. This is a world where it is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. You die quick in his anarchy. And you don't just worry about your survival, you lose it. And what is he talking about? Anticipatory wars. That would be what we call preventive and preemptive wars today. That is what he talked about as the consequences. And look at all the possibilities I laid out there. And now that I'm coming to give the talk, I have the first one, Israel versus Iran, that's actually happening. So this is actually occurring, folks. That tells me as a social scientist, there's something to this hypothesis I'm putting forward. This is a real test in the real world as falsifying these theories. The final issue is, can China rise peacefully and maybe become the new number one? That's really a big question for China. No one in China likes to talk about number one, okay? So I'm saying yes. I'm saying that the world is increasingly soft balancing against the United States. I'm saying that this conflict that's so far been occurring in America, Europe, and the Middle East is only moderately hurting China. It's hurting China, but it's only moderately so, and it's not focused on China, okay? And China has much better options than aggressive options for its own security. Now, this is the big picture of the world balance of power, the way I study the world balance of power, which is economic power. And what you see is that up until the beginning of the Trump presidency, this is the world that we have with the alliances. We basically have, with our strength and Europe and others in Asia, we have about half of the world's GDP. China, Russia, a quarter. But what's the risk for the United States going forward as we see soft balancing? This drifts to the other side. I'm not saying China has to go out there and organize this. I'm not saying, in fact, if they try to organize it, the American administration would love that, because then they can paint China as the bad guy. No, the Chinese foreign minister, I'm sorry to say as an American, has really got this right. No, you let America cause all this instability. You just sit back and play good cop here, and people will just come to China as the source of stability, and that's basically what's happening. Now, what is China's best strategy in the future? It is development. And why? Because in today's world, power equals innovation, domestic innovation. It doesn't even equal grabbing resources. It is about innovation. China's survival is power and its economic development. And China has been pouring resources into its future industries. And that's what I wanted to come and see for myself on this trip. Now, I've been to the Xiaomi production facility. You're going to see some pictures of this in just a moment. This is not just assembling cars and not just with a few people. There's no people on the assembly line turning anything at the Xiaomi plant. And I was physically there. And I'll show you the best pictures there are, because they won't let you put the good stuff on the internet. And they wouldn't let me take pictures of the really good stuff. But I'll tell you, the humans there, you know what they are? With iPads. Track it. No turning anything. Very different world than we're used to thinking about. What about Alibaba, the iCloud, their iCloud here? They are poised to capitalize here on AI in Asia, as you're going to see. This isn't about worrying about America at all. In fact, I'm kind of hoping to talk them into getting interested in America to try to build some positive relationships here going forward. Then there's also the Wuhan model, I'm starting to call it. You see, for decades, America's Rust Belt, think Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Kansas City, they lost all their smokestack industries here. Wuhan too, they were steel. What happened here? We talked, and I'm from Western PA, we talked about doing some kind of renaissance in Pittsburgh. Didn't do anything, folks. No real benefit whatsoever. Wuhan is a model here that's really impressive. This is not something copying an American city. They're leading this for American cities. And what is that future industrial growth going to be hurt by the tariffs? Modestly so. Modestly so. Even if there was all the trade was cut off, a lot of that future-oriented industrial growth is going to happen because it's not hinged on anything with America. So what could throw this off for China? Having reckless counter policies. And that's why I advise moderation. And by the way, that's good for America too, because we live in a world now where we've already got three of these big regions. We've got Europe escalating under Trump, the Middle East escalating under Trump talking about escalating in North America. The last thing we need is military escalation in Asia, even for America. So that's why this is in America's interest as well. So will China become the new number one? I think it could well do, but it depends on China being the moderate realist, the Bismarck here of the group. Now, I've got 10 minutes left, okay? And I'd like to do something. I haven't given this presentation before, so I don't really know how this is going to work out. But I just wanted to give you some of the pictures from my tour of the China's advanced industries that I've been going through for the last 10 days, because it's one of the second really big goals I have. So here's what I've been doing. So I have been touring China's key industrial centers, those that the government would allow me in, and there's some in Beijing, okay, you'll see that. But what's really striking is it's the second-tier cities. It's the Pittsburghs, the St. Louises, the Kansas City. That's where things are really taking off here. This isn't about Beijing and Silicon Valley. In fact, I think now all this discussion of comparing, well, DeepSeek's 2-3 months behind what's happening. No, this is a completely misnomer. All these standards here, and I can see why China loves the standard because it diminishes the jealousy and so forth, but it's misleading as to what's really happening here in China. So I went to Beijing, Wuhan, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, and these visits all happened in that period here. Now, I first came in 1979. So I thought I would do this talk, and this is what took so long today, to try to find pictures of 1979 to compare today. Because what's happening, folks, is this idea of China being 2 or 3 months ahead or behind, this is totally missing it. In these 45 years, look at the dramatic shifts that are happening. Imagine the next 10 years, the next 20 years of anything like this. America's got to wake up. We are in deep trouble if we don't here. And it's not about fighting a war. We're going to be left out of the new innovation revolution that's happening inside of China. So this is the Xiaomi robotic EV production. So you can see they welcome me, and I can't believe how much all these important people took the time out to spend all this time with me. It's such an honor they would do that. And look at that beautiful car. That beautiful car. You're going to see more and more the luxury. They're not selling green. They're not selling that, oh, isn't this great to save the planet? They're saying, here, ladies, is where you put your high-heeled shoes as you get into the car in this special place. Oh, my goodness gracious, the creature they're selling intelligent luxury. That's what's going on here. And this is like overwhelming. And I brought one of my graduate students here with his girlfriend. Oh, my goodness gracious, he's really wants these things now. What does this turn on? This is on the right, the chassis. Notice there's no welding. You probably can't tell. This is not welded. There's no welding. The battery is really, really critical. And why is that critical? It's not just because it's a battery. The number one reason they told me from all their market research is true of BYD as well, which they've done great research. Remember, I do survey. I love this stuff. Is that the number one thing that stops someone from buying an EV is the time to charge. So their goal is to have stations where you have the oil, gas, fueling, you have the charging, both happen completely in 10 minutes. No difference. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. And then they add the luxury on top of that for at least those that can pay for the luxury. That's what's happening with this with the race with the batteries. Notice this is the actual factory itself. Notice what's on top of that factory. Solar panels. 80% of their power comes from solar energy. Why? It's not because of saving the planet. It's because this is the problem they're going to have. They have massive electric requirements coming. They've got to find ways to be able to handle all that massive demand that they need for production. That's the assembly done by those robots. That's unfortunately, I couldn't take pictures to watch them actually do it. The entire car done by robots here. Unbelievable. The only humans are monitoring here to pick up and say, oh, that one didn't quite work out right, you got to redo it, et cetera. And then they just start over. They produce one car every 67 seconds. One car every 67 seconds. Think about that. So then, side by side, about an hour away, there's the Mercedes-Benz joint venture that was happening. Now, this is a different story. Okay, I had no idea what I was going to find. Another EV. Okay, so 2 EV plants side by side. Again, the welcome, everybody gives me the big welcome. Humans. This was built, this joint venture, and it starts in 2018. The Shumai starts in 2022, only 4 or 5 years different. The big difference is robotic in the installation. They only have 5% robotics contributing to the assembly. 95% done by humans here. That's what's occurring in that plant, and that's what the differences are. So what's going to happen is, over time, you can see who's really going to win out. Now, I also thought you'd like to see, and I couldn't believe this when I saw it. Of course, they take me out to a restaurant and I told them I liked the hot pot from my previous trips here. What do? They take me to the robotic hot pot restaurant in Beijing that started in 2018. And this is cool. This is cool. We don't have anything like this in Hyde Park or Chicago. And who serves you? The robots serve you. You probably also see this in the hotels. I did too. I couldn't believe it. Room services now with the robots. This is expanding. But it's not just robot servers. Those robot arms, which again, they don't want you to take these pictures, folks, but you get behind here, the robots are doing all the cooking. They're doing all the assembly of the food. You've got the humans doing a little bit of directing, pushing buttons here and so forth. But they're not turning screws here anymore, not in this. Now, then I go to Wuhan. What do I see in Wuhan? Well, I was in Wuhan in 2014. I wasn't there in 1979. So I did find a picture of Wuhan 2015 to compare this with. And you can see there's been a major change. It's not quite as dramatic, of course, but there's been a major change, and it's now a more advanced city. But the really big thing that's here I went to go see is the Optics Valley, which they modeled after Silicon Valley. But Wuhan Optics Valley is basically advanced laser cutting and laser welding. This is the advanced stuff that's being done to a millimeter of specifications here that allows much, much more efficiency, much, much more economy on materials. And I'm actually going through the high-tech laser optics firm itself. So first thing they did is they took me to, essentially, they've got a little museum to give you the whole background so you could see the trajectory of how this thing is building. And the big thing that I see here is almost from the beginning, they're integrating university research and private industry. But it's not just happening Stanford and Silicon Valley or Harvard, MIT in the Boston area. This is happening in second-tier city. Again, think Pittsburgh if you're in America. That's what needs to happen here for Pittsburgh. Then we go to the high-tech intelligent lasers here. So now I'm meeting with the factory manager, the guy who's actually running the whole thing. Okay, I can't believe I'm getting all this great attention. And then I'm seeing all the integration about they are using, you're going to see they do so much with chips. There's a lot underneath this, folks. This isn't just one little industry. Now this, they would let me take pictures of. This is the actual industrial lasers here as they're both forming things, cutting things, and then also producing equipment for others to do that. So this is they were allowed me to take it, and mostly, I think they allowed me to take it because mostly what happens is in those boxes. So I can't really see the good stuff. The secret sauce is not so readily available here, but that's what it looks like. And notice how clean it is. Well, then they took me to their chip assembly factory. Okay, and I had to get in the suit here. Those of you that know this, you got to be super clean. They're very, very touchy about this. They wouldn't let very much pictures happen here, but they're producing chips after chips after chips to extremely high levels of exquisite perfection here. And it matters because they're using quite a bit in their lasers. And then of course they're selling them, you know, so you can see right away how this might work. Now then I go to the university. This is the big technical university that's now 100,000 students, its own city within the city. You can do everything here. You never have to leave the city. You can be born there. You can go to movies there. You go to school there. You die there. There's no reason to leave this city. Okay, it's amazing. But that's where they gave me the big macro picture of China, digital China, which many of you probably maybe know more about than I do. These are the 5-year plans, which now have 10-year plans. I heard a lot about how these are being constructed and so forth. Really quite amazing and impressive. When I was here in 1979, I was with university professors, economists. I was 5 weeks touring steel mills, textile mills, tea plantations. None of those 30, all we did was tour for 5 weeks, these enterprises, because they wanted to know, could China modernize? Well, what they meant by modernize was just have more than 10% industry in China. They had no idea about this. It's amazing. Too bad we can't have a seance and talk to them. That would really be the cool thing. But this is the big plans, and you see the metrics. And then also, they're solving problems. They're seeing right away they have energy problems, and they're already leading in how to solve those problems here and so forth. So I call this the Wuhan model now, which is university private firm clusters here. And this, I think, would be a tremendous way in which China and the United States could benefit. This is how business in China could help the blue collar and help get on the good side of President Trump. Yeah, give him a nice party, a military parade. Okay, but if you really want to get on his good side, go to the MAGA base, the blue collar base. And you know what? If he won't pay attention to you, go to the Democrats, because there's some pretty smart Democrats here starting to think about these things here. Ro Khanna from the University of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, some others. They're thinking about this. So this isn't just like you got to help the red. This is you got to help the blue collar. That's the big deal for China. That's what they should focus on. And so now, then I go to Hangzhou. This shows you, I did go in 79 to Hangzhou, so that's why I picked that 79. I was on that river, right, or the lake right at that time. And now look at the difference in those years. This is the Alibaba Cloud AI in Hangzhou. They're taking me right through. They're showing me how the data centers are going to work and what they're going to produce. And this stuff is already now available. This isn't future technology. What they're doing now is they're going to give people a 360-degree immersion when they watch sports. So when we watch wrestling, you get to decide where you want to be on the mat to see what's coming at you and pretend you're the person there. You're the star of this. Think of the NFL football. For those of you who know NFL football, man, the NFL football is going to make enormous amounts of money on it. There could be a lot here for this. Also, products. So they showed me how that woman doesn't actually exist. There's no woman like that. What they have is a sock. That's what they're selling. And they can craft, the person, the culture, the surroundings to that sock for any community in the entire world to sell more socks. That's what's occurring there. And then we have the driverless technology, which is improving. This is, though, their growth plan. Right now, Alibaba Cloud is number 4. They've already beaten 5 and 6. They expect there to be huge global growth in AI. And what are they doing? They want to capitalize on Asia. That's their number 1 goal because they're expecting the most growth in Asia. They're taking Asia. So yeah, they'd like to pick up some of the benefits here in the other parts of the world as well. But this is a very smart plan here, tremendous. Now, this is BYD, another electric car vehicle plant. This is for the mass market. So Xiaomi makes about 350,000 cars this year. They're going to make 5 million this year. So it's a much bigger, and it's very nice. They're treating me very nice, you can see with this. And then they're explaining to me how their cars work. But I wanted to show you this. They picked me up in the airport on a BYD, what they called it, their executive office car. And I'm sitting in the back. The driver takes his hands off the steering wheel and we're just going through the city. We're going at 60 miles an hour, getting on the expressways and so forth here. But the big thing here, and I really wanted to show some of the professors, John Mearsheimer, is I'm sitting in the back. They have screens in the back and we just call up, we go to YouTube, and this is in China. We go to YouTube and we get John talking about, I'm pretty sure he's talking about the Iran conflict here. Literally, this isn't an old thing. This is just happening as we speak. It's stunning to see what's happening here with these cars. They're also building advanced models of these EVs. They're going to be more rugged than the most rugged trucks. They're going to be able to pull more capacity, the biggest trucks here, I mean, passenger trucks here. I mean, really quite amazing stuff. And this is already there. And then this is their plan for rapid growth. And basically, they're showing me that 90% is domestic. Only 10% is international. Yep, they certainly want to grow it. The head of their whole America division is the one who was hosting me through this. She would definitely love to be able to grow this. Gets a lot of benefits for that. But it's not hinging on what's happening in America. This is a big thing. Shenzhen, the fishing village here. Many of you have probably been there because it's so close to Hong Kong, but you see it in 79. Now you see it in Shenzhen. We took the train out of Hong Kong as we went up to Guangzhou in 1979. Nobody even bothered to pay attention to what was happening in Shenzhen. This is way too minor of a thing. The future is here, folks. The future is here, and I'm glad and I thank the Beijing Center for the opportunity to see it with my own eyes and understand it. And just thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, the Hong Kong Center for doing this, and also the Beijing Center who contributed a lot as well. Thank you.
And thanks so much for energetically presenting your field work, your research, and succinctly. I think it really helps us have an understanding of the things that are going on that sometimes we don't hear about in the U.S. But I won't belabor any dialogue here. I just want to introduce our Professor Ken Pomeranz. Many of you know him as our faculty director. I like to call this a really good pairing tonight. You had the main event, and now we have a really fine wine to go with Bob's presentation. Ken previously taught at the University of California, Irvine. His work mostly focuses on China. He's really one of the preeminent scholars in China, on modern China, and I think that's why it's just so great that we have Professor Pomeranz and Professor Pape here together to go into dialogue on this presentation. Professor Pomeranz has also worked on state formation, imperialism, religion, and other topics. His publications, which you all probably know and have signed autographed books of, are The Great Divergence, China, Europe, and the Making of the Modern World Economy, The Making of a Hinterland, State, Society, and Economy in Inland North China, 1853 to 1937, and The World That Trade Created. He's a fellow of many very prestigious foundations and academies. I won't get into detail on those just for the sake of time. His current project that he's working on is a book called Why is China So Big? And I'm really proud to call him a colleague. We work very closely here on the Hong Kong campus, And I'd like to have you all welcome Professor Pomeranz to moderate the conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And thank you, above all, Bob, for coming here. We're really glad to have you. And we'll obviously be talking a lot about China, but I wanted to start actually by talking about the US.
Yeah.
Because you observed, I think, quite logically, that this is a foreign policy that's driven by domestic politics, but not in a sense by domestic interests, right? It's not that Trump's base is going to be better off materially because of these tariffs. It's a kind of psychological thing. So I guess I want to start with, when the material benefits don't roll in, how long can this be sustained?
So for the last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time studying American political violence. You heard in the introduction, in foreign policy in the fall, I published a 5,000-word piece on what's happening inside of America. I called it Our Own Worst Enemies. The number one enemy for President Trump, and actually for many Americans now, is not China, it's liberals in the United States. And what's occurring is, and you see this in the a foreign affairs piece, is that we are going through in America more social change than we have since the 1960s. And when countries go through massive social change, that often leads to lots of turbulent politics and then political violence. And in the last 5 years, we've had wave after wave of American political violence, and I won't take the time to summarize, but literally, as I'm getting on the plane, I'm publishing an op-ed in the New York Times. As I'm getting on, I'm publishing on Iran, I'm publishing in the New York Times, the political violence stuff, because this is really, these are connected. The more political instability internally, the more we're seeing external instability in the world, and it's because America is that important to the world. Now, what is the social change that's happening? The details will vary from time to time. So it's not always the same detailed social change that's occurring in the United States over history and also across countries. The big number one social change is America's changing from a white majority country to a white minority country for the first time in our 250-year history. And this is having dramatic effects on our politics. See, we've been doing this drip by drip for about 35 years, 40 years, but it's this last 10 years that began what I call the tipping point generation, where we're now at 58%, where in the 90s, we're about 75% white. We're now 58% white in this 30 years. And in the next, it'll be another 10 or 15 years before we're 49% white. Well, Donald Trump, this explains his meteoric rise from nowhere and why his number one issue was immigration. Because if you don't like what this change will mean, then you support Donald Trump. And if you want to reverse it, you've got to not just freeze who comes into the country, you've got to deport millions of Americans. This is a very, very big issue. Now, if you're on the other side and you see Donald Trump coming, what do you want to do? Speed it up. You want to keep it going or maybe speed up the change, open the borders to have massive numbers of new non-white immigrants into the United States. That's the big radical battle. And that's why we're having political violence driven by both the right and by the left. This is not, we can debate whether it's 60-40 or 40-60, but this is not all coming from just one side of the house. And this is spreading now as we go forward. So this is the big instability that's occurring. It's a battle for political control. That's why these material benefits that you're talking about, Ken, are second potatoes, small potatoes here. The real battle here inside of America is for the political control of America. And that's one of the reasons you're seeing Donald Trump doing radical things like sending 700 Marines into liberal LA. Just imagine that, where 30% of LA here are immigrants. I mean, my goodness gracious here. This is what's driving those policies and why, yes, Donald Trump's being reckless internationally. He's being more reckless internally, and it's a battle for political control, which is why his base is accepting all of these like economic downsides. And I'm not used to saying those things. I'm a card carrying, you know, sort of liberal international order folks supposed to believe in all, but that's not the world that we live in today.
Okay, let me just follow up just a little bit on that, because it does seem to me we're getting two slightly different stories here, right? One is a story, you know, you started by talking about wage stagnation, for instance, right? And yeah, there's been wage stagnation for working class people. But then your story here is really not so much driven by that as by just pure racial antagonism.
Well, I would say a little bit different here. What you're seeing is two ideas of America clashing. So you might think of it as a domestic clash of civilizations, Ken. So what's occurring is that as you're getting the demographic shift that's occurring inside, you're getting especially the pain of that shift on white, non-college educated Americans, but it's also affecting some that are non-white. And that's why I would call it, it's not exactly race, I would call it the idea of the traditional America versus multicultural America, which I know sounds is a little bit of a slight difference, but it matters because many of the folks who are not white, very traditional, very much they're very religious, many of them. The big divide in the Hispanic community that voted for Trump is simply how often they go to church. It's not whether they're Hispanic, it's how traditional are they. They love the traditional America, and that's the bigger divide.
Okay. I do want to get to China soon, but I just want to follow up one more on this.
Yep.
Because I'm a little skeptical about the term traditional here.
Okay.
Right? I mean, think about, for instance, the kinds of churches that white Trump supporters go to. Right? These are these mega churches that are a phenomenon of the last few decades. Right? This is not traditional American Protestantism or traditional American Catholicism. Right? This does seem to me to be something new and different. And the extraordinary degree of, I mean, yes, there's always been a North-South thing. There have been many divisions in the United States, but the intensity of the hostility does seem to me to be something new and something that can't really be that well explained by saying these are people defending tradition, because what they're clinging to, you know, suburban megachurches, you know, Joe Rogan podcasts, etc. That's not traditional America. That's not conservative in the sense that America was conservative for so long.
Ken, I really appreciate this because I told you there's social change happening. I said there's one big thing. There is a second thing that I think may satisfy you, which is since the mid-1980s, we've not only been going through the demographic shift I laid out, but we have shifted a huge portion of our wealth to the top 20% of Americans. And what that means is the bottom 80% are now in a negative sum world. They're not just in a zero-sum world with each other. They're in a negative sum world with each other. So this is a very different world when you're saying, well, wait a minute, the intensity here. Why the intensity? It's because in our studies, you heard some of the papers, but we don't have time to talk about them. We're studying the extent to which the Trump supporters and those using the support force for Trump are worried about the decline of status over time. And what you have is both the radical conservative part and the radical liberal part are both worried about relative status decline. And the reason is because 80% of America is in a negative sum world. So it is not just that, well, wait a minute, whites should understand that blacks have had a bad time of it and so forth. Well, when we focus group those whites, they say, well, yeah, they say that, but whites have come up a lot more than whites have who are going down. Both of these things are true. It is not true that one is right and the other is wrong. Only one side is feeling the pain. And the reason both sides can feel the pain at exactly the same time is because we have transferred so much wealth to the top 20% of America. And this is true of both Democrats and Republicans. Both parties are completely complicit in this. And what is happening is we're getting negative sum competition in the bottom part. So you have race, you have negative sum competition. We are coming apart at the seams, and not a single party will talk seriously about what even Bernie Sanders talks about. We'll go after the billionaires. No, you've got to stop transferring the wealth to the top 80% of Americans. And that is what neither party will do. And if we don't deal with both of these issues, we may well come apart.
Okay,
Well, you pulled it all out of me.
okay. On that cheery note, let's switch to instead focusing primarily on responses and above all on China's responses. So, and this is a question from the audience, but I'm sure it's one that you've thought of, which is, you were, of course, you saw some very impressive things on an organized tour.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about how typical you think these phenomena were?
Yeah, so in 1979, when I came, that was an organized tour. So China had a China travel service. And in order to travel in China in 1979, I also did this in the Soviet Union in 1982. So I'm very familiar with what an organized tour looks like. We were taken around by a single minder. In China, it was a woman about 30 years old. She took us to our hotel. We got to shop at the friendship stores. If we went and saw anybody in the streets, it was all carefully controlled. Each of the places we all saw were all carefully vetted here. Well, what happened here is that it's just a much less controlled situation. Now, it is true the government had to give the okay. So I could not go to places here unless the Chinese government gave the okay. But if you just saw, and you have only seen about half of the things that I saw here, one of the big things I saw was the e-government in Hangzhou, which is where you go to get your driver's license. Now, I don't know how you would control this thing, but if you go to the DMV in Chicago, this is a disaster, folks. This is, yeah, everybody who's been to Chicago knows what I'm talking about. You should go to the DMV in Hangzhou, and you will see a completely different experience here. And the reason is because they are pro-customer, pro-citizen. In Chicago, there's no pro-citizen. Yeah, you know exactly what I mean. So yes, Ken, there's probably a lot that has been sort of like, I'm not seeing the worst, maybe I'm even seeing the best of the best here. I'm all accepting that. But look at the quantity of things I'm seeing here. Look at the variety of things I'm seeing here. And the big things I didn't get to see. I didn't get to see TikTok. I wanted to go to see TikTok. I didn't get to see the Huawei headquarters here. Tom Friedman, the New York Times, got to do that. So I guess if I can become a New York Times writer, maybe. And also I didn't get to go to see DeepSeek. These are the couple of things they wouldn't let me go see. So they let me on the shop floor. I don't think they were kind of boogering how the robots worked at the Xiaomi. So look, there's no doubt I'm seeing the best of the best or something nice here, but there's a lot of good there. And I just don't believe for a second that it is like, I've been like totally bamboozled here. The parts I'm not seeing is I'm not seeing like, what are the underlying social problems inside of China? What's happening with the housing problems here inside of China? But I didn't come to look at the housing prices inside of China. That's what I came to look at, the advanced industries, and they gave me, I'm really impressed they showed me as much as they did. I mean, they trust me, not, I think, because I'm an American. I think it shows they're pretty smart. They're looking for ways to do business with America, and they're hoping maybe this will spark an idea.
Okay, this is a sort of a variation on a question that somebody asked, but we have a question about why the impact of American tariffs on China is not so great. And I want to tie that to your comment that at least one of the people you talked to said, look, 90% of our market is going to be domestic. So did you get a sense of how that's supposed to unspool in a country that has this, actually not done terribly well at promoting domestic consumer demand?
Yeah, so one of the things I've been really struck by, so I came in 1979, and I saw no real attention in that tour, even though it was carefully choreographed by the Communist Party, attention by any of the industries to consumer demand. Zero in 1979. I come back in 2012, and I was here in China 2012 to 15, about 6 or 8 trips, a whole lot of different things. And again, I'm seeing very little attention. In fact, at 798, that big art thing in Beijing, if any of you have been there, in 2012, when I got to see it, it's all about complaining about how hyper-nationalism is making all the people in China feel isolated and so forth, and terrible about each other, and so forth and so on. When I come back now, and I'll just use the DMV example, because that's that e-governance here that's in Hangzhou, and it's just one of the districts of the 13 million people. They each have 13 of these buildings, and it's amazing to see how much they're bending over backwards with customer satisfaction. So again, they're taking me around with the bosses. So I needle them a bit. I say, well, okay, so tell me, you're showing me 100% satisfaction on this. I don't believe that. When I see 100% here, if everybody in my class 100% get an A, I know I'm being a softie here. Okay, yeah, okay. So I just don't believe that. How are you actually doing that? No, Professor Pape, here's how it really works. The truth is, what we're doing is we're trying to get 90% plus where everybody does everything with an app. So you come in, you tap your cell phone, you tap, and even if you could do it at home, they try to make you do it on an app. And then something goes wrong, and there are going to be 4 or 5% who are complaining. And that could be a third of the people coming in. Because again, 90% of this is happening before you even get into the building. Then that's when they say we do face-to-face. And our goal in face-to-face is to make you satisfied. We're trying to actually get you to agree. So that's how they're getting to that high degree of customer satisfaction. I would take half of that in Chicago. Okay, so if that's what it means. So I think what you are seeing here, and you see this with the luxury that I've been driven in. I mean, it's not just they're showing me pictures. They're trying to appeal to the customer, and what the BYD people told me, again, their marketing, they are trying to make the emotional connection with their customer, because they don't want the car to just be a tool. The car can be a tool, and that will sell them 2 or 3 million cars a year. They want the car to be a member of the family. So you fawn over it. You're going to do all kinds of things with it like your pet. And that's where they're really going to clean up the profits here. So that's their profit incentive. And they said it turns on emotional connection with the customer. Well, I thought about buying a new car, and I just drive a Toyota. I'm sorry, you guys give me a bigger pay raise, but I can buy one of these beautiful EVs. But there's no attention like this, okay, in the car, the Toyota dealership here. This is not the same thing. And so I'm just saying, this is a change. And what they told me was that, and this is a little bit gentle here, so I have to kind of read between the leaves, but basically you had Tiananmen Square in 1989. So you got a choice. You can either deal with very unsatisfied people, and China can do that, and they can go mow down people. They can do that. Or they can decide to make a big hunk of people pretty satisfied. And maybe they're not going to be 100% satisfied, but if you look at the curves where all that half of America is going down, the dirt poor people in China, many of them are better off. Some of those plant managers are telling me they lived in 70s by the oil lamp. That's how they lived in Wuhan, with the oil lamp. Now they're driving those EVs, and one of them is the head of that EG laser firm that you just saw. That's a pretty big change from the oil lamp.
Okay.
I don't mean to be a salesman for China. Don't get me wrong. I'm not
Okay.
here to do that. I'm trying to fix America, folks. And if anything, I'd like to have a little bit of help from the Chinese leader. Yeah, you got it. You want to have some, I want some help.
Okay. So here's an interesting question. So what you've been talking about, for obvious reasons, is a spectacular record of growth, taken over the 40-year.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, truly
right,
spectacular.
right. And
Unbelievable.
there can be no dispute about that.
Yeah.
You're also seeing, or you also saw on your tour, very impressive technological development that seems to suggest further forward momentum.
Yes.
A lot of other people are seeing the boom slowing down.
Mhm.
And in particular, I think it's interesting in terms of the high degree of mechanization you saw. The figures on productivity growth in China are really soft, right? And that has nothing to do with American tariffs or anything. That's how do you reconcile those data points?
Yeah, yeah. So look, the one thing I learned, so before 9/11, I half wrote a book on technological change and great power politics. So I was working on that in the 1990s because I wanted to know, well, what was going to happen with China. Gorbachev blew it. Was Deng Xiaoping going to make it? That kind of thing. So I spent a number of years working on this issue. And I studied a lot of economists trying to figure out their theories of economic growth. And the big thing I discovered, folks, is economists have no theory of economic growth. They just don't. That's why no one's won the Nobel Prize for correctly predicting economic growth. Go and look at how people, what they win the Nobel Prize for. That isn't it. So I can't tell you, Ken, that China is going to have surely spectacular growth over the next 30 or 40 years. What I can tell you is that they've had pretty impressive growth here. And I can tell you that there are more than pockets of that advanced future industries. The big thing, I think, is that it's innovation, which is the source of China's real future and power. And I think that's the big change that's occurred. And the more that message gets out, the more I think that's important. The second thing is that even if China freezes where it is today, I would love American second-tier cities to catch up. So this idea that China's catching up to America, this again is a misnomer. Comparing Wuhan to Silicon Valley in San Francisco, total mistake. San Francisco is a first-tier city. You compare Wuhan to Pittsburgh, to St. Louis, that's the actual comparison set. The second-tier cities. What we need in America to do is catch up to the forward industrial development of China's second-tier cities. So for me, ultimately, I'm still an American, okay? And I'm still sort of, I wouldn't use that word American first because that's kind of gone the wrong way. But I fundamentally came because I wanted to understand what's really happening with China's industrial growth. Here, I'm reading these different stories in The Economist too. And just like when I went to the Soviet Union in 1982, I was reading The Economist and I was being told they're going to overtake us and bury us. And I go in 1982 and I realize they're stuck in the 1950s. Well, there's somebody stuck here in the 20 years ago, here in the 30 years ago in the second-tier cities. It's not China, it's the United States who's stuck in the 1990s. I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania, which has become Trump country, third-tier city. I know a lot. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I know a lot about the second tier and third tier. We are way behind what's happening in China. And so, look, honestly, Ken, I'm focused on bringing America up.
So what would a set of policies for Pittsburgh look like?
So I've talked to this is what I'm talking about with folks in Wuhan, because I'm talking, so again, I'm very privileged to be hosted by not just the
people kind of showing you a showroom or so forth. These are the owners of the business. These are the folks who built the business over the last 25 years. Now, I can't say that with Alibaba. So Mr. Wang did not meet with me on this trip here, so I can't say that, but I am meeting with the next tier down. So it's very impressed by that. So I think Wuhan's a very good example of this, which is that they explained to me that, because I was asking them, how can we really sort of transpose the Wuhan model to these second-tier cities in the United States? And they said, well, Professor Pape, you spend all this time with talking to the West Wing of the White House and so forth. This is just not that problem. This is the problem of mayors and governors. Mayors and governors. That's who built Wuhan, the Wuhan model. And the reason it's happening in China, they explained to me, is because China is allowing competition among those. So yeah, everybody's seeing this, the competition among the second-tier cities. So they compete with each other and they get more benefits with each other. That's the competition here that's really allowed this to occur. So I'm hearing that, and I'm not going to name any names, but I'm going to start to think about how to actually connect with some of these folks. And I would love, with the University of Chicago Center, my center, Chicago Project on Security and Threats, I'm the founder of that center. I would love to come back in 6 months or a year and lead a delegation here to kind of go through this trip and let them be bamboozled too by the Chinese government. And hopefully they'll go back and we'll start to really try to figure out our second-tier city problem.
Okay, back to China and back to foreign policy for a minute.
Mhm.
You made the interesting point in your presentation that the Chinese response to American, whatever we want to call it,
dismantling the liberal international
okay,
order.
dismantling-
It's literally
right.
America dismantling, and I think we
Right.
should get used to those words. It doesn't make me, I'm not happy about it. We built that order. We're dismantling the liberal international order.
Okay. But specifically to the moves that the US has made aimed directly at China,
Yep.
you made the interesting point that China's response so far has been to match but not to escalate.
And even slightly undermatch.
Okay. I was wondering if you could spend a little bit more time on that, telling us, what that means concretely and why that's the best strategy.
Yeah, so exactly. So what we saw is we have in March, the Trump administration starts to put some additional tariffs on the world, and China's getting, sort of goes up to this 30% level. So they're getting some additional tariffs on China. Then Liberation Day comes, and then as a result of a back and forth after Liberation Day, because China gets mad, they retaliate, Trump goes up to 145. Well, what I was really struck by was the Chinese government said in their official statements, we're not playing numbers game. No numbers game. So they came up to 125. So they did not go to 165 or 185. They did not try to out-bully the bully. Well, you know what? That frustrates bullies on the playground. It also frustrates people in international politics. So people have had me in strategy. No, I teach some work by Thomas Schelling, where sometimes it's in your interest to pass the initiative for escalation onto the other. You'd have to take my courses to sort of really hear the full story behind this. But this is a very smart move because, see, this ultimately is irrational, what's occurring. So by under-responding, you're forcing the Americans to be the irrational actor. Yeah, Trump's been irrational, but make him do it over and over again and notice that things kind of calm down. Iran just did the same thing. They literally did the same thing with, as they're responding to, Israel is bombing Iran's nuclear targets. Iran did not bomb Dimona. It did not bomb any military bases that would have nuclear weapons for Israel. They could have done that. They did not do that. Then the United States bombs, okay? And what do? They don't just, they respond to a military base, but they tell the Trump administration, we're coming in 6 hours, move the people. And they do, so that no American troops are killed. Well, they are being firm to a point, but they're not one-upping the bully. So they're now forcing the other side to take the initiative for irrational. So I'm pointing to a student who's had me in class. So this is very, very smart, sophisticated realist stuff. This is like the black belt stuff. This is not the green belt stuff. This is not somebody just dealing with bully on playground. This is very sophisticated and so forth. And so I really think that this is what I mean by what's happening with how people are dealing with it, dealing with Trump. I think the Europeans just now have not done as well, because what they did in the meeting they just had is they played to Trump's ego. And I don't think that I don't see any sign that Trump is going to provide any greater military aid for Ukraine. That's the bottom line for the Europeans, because America is producing all the military equipment. The Europeans have no military industries, right? Very little. So they need a year or two to ramp up. What they need from Donald Trump is weapons moving to Ukraine, not just be nice and so Trump doesn't have a hissy fit here. And I don't think that this has worked out as well. So as I look at this, I think China's done very well in dealing with the reckless, what appears to be reckless. I think the Iranians have actually done pretty well. Neither one has surrendered. Both are trying to keep their security. I think the Europeans, maybe I should go to Europe.
Okay, got a lot of questions. We're going to run a little bit past 8 because I think the conversation is going
Absolutely.
going really well. So you've emphasized that the dismantling of the liberal international order comes from a way of playing to the psychological interests, if not the material interests, of the people who are losing out. And so the question from one of the audience here is, but then why are the Ackmans, Zuckerbergs, and Musks supporting the dismantling of the liberal order?
Yeah, I think that exactly why the businessmen support the dismantling of the liberal order probably comes back to why businesses support moves to centralize, or what the Democratic Party would say, create authoritarianism in the first place. So if you haven't studied, say, the role of business in Germany in the 1930s, it's just a good thing to study, because you would see that all the business people here, maybe they didn't like Jews, maybe not, but the bottom line here is they want to make money. And so what they're doing is they're siding with whoever is in the government, and they're doing it pretty strongly. 10, 12 years ago, because of all the terrorism that was occurring in the Middle East, I was going to Turkey quite a bit. So I would go often to Ankara and so forth. Enormous support by the business community here for, essentially an authoritarian government here. Because the authoritarian governments, when they centralize their authority, whether you call them authority or not, what that means is they pick the winners and losers. The more you centralize power in a government, the more it picks the winners and losers. And so what you are seeing is the business people want to be one of the winners. And that's why the Zuckerbergs and so forth and so on, they just couldn't wait to give buy $40 million of Melania's book. Okay. That's a steal here if you can save billions of dollars in your business. And this is the norm, I'm sorry to say. If you're looking for business to bail out America, I'm sorry, that's just probably not what's going to happen.
Okay, back across the Pacific.
Yeah.
So, got a question here from somebody who I guess maybe doesn't quite buy the argument that China is responding fully rationally, because the question is, why is China in conflict with the Philippines and Taiwan and supporting Pakistan instead of allying with the larger markets like India to hedge against these?
Oh, yeah. The reason is because China has to hedge against the counterbalancing that my good mentor and friend John Mearsheimer is constantly calling for. So if you're a good realist here, you don't assume everything's going to work out smoothly. No. You've got to kind of play both sides of the street to some extent. What's what's got to be judicious about if you're Bismarck is you don't make matters worse. So as you can see with Pete Hegseth coming here to Asia, I think he's been very provocative, because I think that what the Trump administration would like is they'd like China to help bail them out politically by doing something aggressive. And I think Pete Hegseth showed up here to try to sort of tweak this a little bit, see if we can get under China's skin, and it didn't really work. So Ken, I'm not telling you that this is all hunky-dory and it's smooth waters here. What I mean is, can China rise peacefully without a war where America and Chinese forces are killing each other, where there are hundreds, if not thousands, dead on each side? Low-level security competition, not a problem. States have been dealing with that forever. So I think Mearsheimer, again, my great mentor and friend, I'm his first PhD student. I think he's brilliant in explaining security competition. Where John and I disagree, and we did this at Tsinghua in 2013, is I don't think we're heading to a conventional war. I just don't think so. And there's lots of reasons why that's not going to happen. John thinks there's more risk of an actual conventional war breaking out. If we get one, John's right, I'm wrong. Okay. But if all we have is security competition like the kind you're describing, Ken, and the question is describing, then both John and I can be right.
Okay.
John won't like that, though, because he wants to be right. And I said that on tape.
Let's hone in on a portion of that for a moment.
Okay.
Because it does seem that one of the things that's really frightening in the current environment is that with China and the US essentially not talking to each other, right? The risk that, there are planes flying near each other all the time, et cetera, some hot-headed lieutenant can start an incident, right? When you're talking to each other, okay, there's an incident, both sides manage it. When you're not talking to each other, the fear is those little things spiral out of control, even though nobody at the top wanted them to. How real do you think that sort of fear is in this environment, and what can be done about it?
So when I was coming between 2012 and 2014 and 15, that kind of accidental war escalating up was, I thought, the number one fear. So I was really pushing for a new hotline, a more thicker hotline between the White House and Beijing. And I was also going to Taiwan, and I was trying to orchestrate and have all the paperwork for a cross-strait conference between China scholars, mainland China scholars, and scholars in Taiwan and America. And it went all the way up, and then President Ma disagreed, didn't think it was a good idea. However, I do believe that hotline did go in here, and I do think that was a good idea to do that. Now, of course, you have to use the hotline, but today it's a much different, more serious world. One of the bigger risks for China today, just to spin out one here so you get some comparison, is as you follow my X account, I'm fully expecting that the strikes on Iran are not preventing nuclear breakout, but are going to speed Iran toward a nuclear breakout. Well, the number one risk for China is they'll get blamed if Iran detonates a nuclear weapon here, even as a demonstration attack on its own territory. There will be people in the United States, in the administration, that are China hawks. There'll be congressmen that are China hawks. They'll be looking for any possible fingerprint here to the CCP and to China that they can find to blame China for Iran's nuclear breakout. So when I mean be moderate, just to put this on tape in case anybody important is really listening, is this is really an important risk here. And it's not going to help for China to say, we didn't do it, because again, this is going to happen under if this scenario happens where you actually have a demonstration use of a nuclear weapon in this, it'll be the first time in 75 years we've seen nuclear weapon used in a tense situation like that. People are going to be extremely upset, and they're going to be more upset as time goes on. This is what I mean by China's got to keep cool head. and not do things here. And so I think China's statements have been good. The rhetoric has been good, but there's got to be a very clear idea that if there's any material support here for Iran, this could blow up in China's face and then blow up in the world, America too. So we don't want to have, these are the risks. So the risks here that, Ken, you're talking about now are just much more severe than everything we've been teaching in my courses for the last 20 years. We're now in a very dangerous world.
Okay, given that it's a dangerous world, I think we should get Mark up here. Well, we've got loads of questions. They keep coming in and there are plenty. Okay, we can do one more.
They've been great. I have to say, great questions here as you folks are doing. Really super.
Okay, I'm going to slightly paraphrase this one to make it fit a little better. But you've talked about some of the reasons why the political mood in the United States is just so sour.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about why so much of the hostility focuses on China in particular? Is it just that China is big, or is there something that makes China a particularly attractive target for people who are trying to stoke a certain kind of
so you saw the kind of anger we've seen against China, you saw against Japan in the 1980s and early 1990s until Japan stopped growing. And the reason was because of the fear that Japan might become number one and so forth. And so that does create this kind of fear of lost primacy and so forth and so on. So what happened is in the 1990s, you had a switch. So it went from being Japan as possibly number one to China as first they can say no, and now maybe number one. So you do get these kind of this kind of competition, the Thucydides trap, kind of that and so forth. But over the last 30 years, this has stayed at a low level of security competition. So I think Mearsheimer is right to say the security competition is there, but it stayed at a fairly low level. Where it did not go up, that it should have gone up, is with COVID. Now, COVID started in Wuhan. I took pictures of the Wuhan lab, okay? So, and also of the market as well. So I wanted to actually, so I like to see everything, okay? And what could have happened here is, given that that already anti-China, call it anger that's existing, that I'm saying is pretty moderate level, not intense. It could have been inflamed. 1 million dead Americans, just to put this in comparison of what COVID did. We lost more per capita per year than either World War I or World War II in America. That's how deadly COVID was for America. Worse than World War I or World War II for the United States. That's a pretty big deal. And you have Donald Trump here. No, doesn't exactly love China. All right, but you got a lot of other China hawks here. It's really striking to me that did not happen. Now, the Chinese government's done everything possible to erase this from everybody's memory, but that's not good enough explanation. China, it did not stop this. I think this is evidence for me that, yes, there can be, you can get this thing to become a much bigger conflict, but I don't think this is just on autopilot and we're heading toward this big World War III in Asia. I think that that could happen, folks. I'm saying it's within our power to make it not happen, and it's not quite as hard as everybody's saying. And the reason, and I think COVID is a very good example of that. So I would just say we should learn from that, and we should see we are not going to be best friends. This is not going to be a relationship like the US and Canada for all of those years. We're no special relationship like the US and Britain. However, there can be basically the middle ground kind of rivalry that stays at this low level of competition that doesn't get into the actual serious military conflict. That is the real thing to avoid. And we need to take more steps and be conscious and talk that way, because the liberal order is now kaput, essentially. We've moved to a more war-prone world, where we need to be more conscious of keeping a lid on that. And I think we can do it, but we've got to talk about this.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Oh,
Bob.
thank you. Thank you.
Um,
Ken. And thank you all the great questions for everybody. That's the best questions I've had on this talk by far, by far.
Thank you both for the academic leadership that you bring to this campus. Bob, thanks for being such a great partner in all of our endeavors together. I hope we have many more. Ken, thanks for your leadership for us all on the Hong Kong campus. I just think you're amazing partners. We're so lucky to have both of you here. I'd like to just close the program for those of you who are on Zoom. I have an announcement to make. So a couple of weeks ago, we started a new program called Nexus Asia. And Nexus Asia brings our UChicago PhD alumni who are teaching in Asia and doing research in Asia with other university institutions. We now bring them to the Hong Kong campus, thanks to some small travel grants that our budgets were generous enough to provide. And so that just started 10 days ago or so. And our next program is called Unruly Spirits, the Rise of Chinese Medicine Therapies for Autism and ADHD. And it's with our UChicago PhD in Comparative Human Development, Amir Hampel, who's teaching up at NYU Shanghai. So that program's on July 24th at 6:30 p.m. And I just want to remind you all of that. I also want to remind you of the course podcast, which is produced here on this campus that features both of our illustrious faculty and many more. We have about 150 faculty on the course podcast. So please tune into the course. Thank you everyone who came here in person. Thank you everyone who's online. And thank you once again to our illustrious professors from the University of Chicago. Have a great evening. Thanks.